There are moments, small and ordinary on the surface, that contain an entire lifetime of truth. They don't shout, they whisper, and if you've been quiet long enough yourself, you can finally hear them. Good evening, my dears. Come, sit, make yourselves comfortable. I want to talk to you tonight about gifts. Not the shiny, expensive kind, but the ones that come wrapped in the plain paper of everyday life. The gifts that aren't really gifts at all, but messages. Sometimes, the most important message arrives in the most unexpected package. For me, it was a small, cheap porcelain bird from a gas station, given to me by my husband on our 40th wedding anniversary. That bird didn't end my marriage. It simply told me that it had been over for a very, very long time. And tonight, I'll tell you what I did next. This isn't a story of rage or revenge. It's a story of quiet eyes, finally opening. It never starts with a bang, my love. It never does. It starts with a note. A small ordinary note. You write it on a Tuesday morning, perhaps on a yellow slip of paper from the pad by the telephone. Or maybe you find a proper card, one with a little flower on the front, and you think this will be nice, he will like this. You write, I love you. Are you right, thinking of you? Are you right, good luck today, my darling? The words are simple. They are true. You fold the note and you tuck it. You tuck it into the lunch pail. You slide it between the wax paper and the apple. You place it under the napkin, the clean iron napkin. You do this with a feeling, a soft warm feeling, a private little ceremony. You are sending a piece of yourself with him out into the world. A tiny secret between you in the middle of his busy day. You picture him finding it. You picture his face. A small smile, maybe a light in his eyes. The thought of that light carries you through your own morning. It is a small thing, such a small thing. Later you are cleaning the kitchen. The lunch pail is back on the counter where he left it. You open it to wash it out. The container is empty. The napkin is crumpled, used. And there is your note. Still folded. The creases you made so carefully are still sharp. The paper is dry. It was never opened. It traveled there in the dark and it traveled back. Your message never arrived. It was carried but not received. You stand there holding this little piece of paper. This I love you that never saw the light. And you feel a strange thing. You feel foolish. Not angry. Not yet. You feel a gentle foolishness, like a child who has whispered a secret to a statue. You look at the note in your hand and you think, well, he must have been in a rush. He had that meeting. He probably just grabbed the sandwich and ate at his desk. He didn't see it. It's not that he ignored it. He just didn't see it. That is the first brick, my dear. The first brick in a foundation you will build for decades. A foundation made of silent explanations. You are the architect of these explanations. You build them to hold up the weight of your own disappointment. You become an expert in the why. Why he forgot to call. Why he didn't notice your new dress. Why his eyes glaze over when you talk about the book you're reading. He's tired. He's stressed from work. He's worried about money. He's not a talker, you know that. He shows his love by providing. He mowed the lawn, didn't he? He fixed the leaky faucet. That is his language. You must learn to translate. You must learn to read the silence and call it contentment. You must interpret the absence of malice as the presence of love. So you learn to speak softer. You learn to edit your thoughts before they become words. You start a sentence about your day, the funny thing the mailman said, and you see his gaze drift to the newspaper over your shoulder, and you let the sentence fade. You don't finish it. The sound of your own voice trailing off becomes familiar to you. You begin to need less. You stop expecting him to ask. You stop hoping he'll remember that you love gardenias or that you're afraid of deep water. You absorb these details back into yourself. They become private facts not to be shared. The landscape of your inner life grows vast and intricate and beautifully lonely. You tent it in silence. You become a ghost in your own home. A pleasant, helpful ghost. You are there in the smell of coffee in the morning. In the clean shirt laid on the bed. In the hot meal on the table at 6. You are a feeling of order, a sense of things being taken care of. But you are not a presence. Not a person with a beating heart that requires witness. You learn to move quietly so as not to disturb the air. You learn to make your emotions small and tidy so they fit neatly into the corners of the life you are building for everyone else. Your laughter becomes measured. Your sighs are soundless. Your tears are a private event reserved for the shower where the water can wash the evidence away before you step out and become the ghost again. The silence grows. It's not his silence. It becomes yours. A choice you make. A shelter you build. Because to speak and not be heard is a special kind of agony. To reach out and touch only air. So you stop reaching. You hold your own hand. You have conversations with yourself in your head. You become your own best company and you tell yourself this is maturity. This is what long marriage is. The quiet companionship. The comfortable silence. You read articles about how passion fades and is replaced by something deeper. You convince yourself this deep thing is what you have. This stillness. This predictability. You call it peace. But it is not peace. It is a ceasefire. A ceasefire you have negotiated with yourself. The terms are simple. You agree to want less. You agree to expect nothing. In return you get no conflict. No confrontation. No risk of that blank look that tells you your heart's concern is trivial. The house is quiet. The meals are on time. The children are cared for. From the outside it looks like a well-run ship. And you are the captain standing alone at the helm in the dead of night, sailing on a sea of perfect calm glassy water with no wind, no stars, just a vast flat expanse of nothing. You forget the sound of your own name. I mean your real name. The name he called you when you were young. The nickname that was his for you alone. It falls out of use. He calls you mom when the children are there. He says hey, or he just starts talking without a preamble. The sound of your name spoken with tenderness becomes a memory so distant it feels like it belongs to another woman in another life. You look at her in photo albums, that young woman with the bright eyes who believed her thoughts were fascinating. You look at her with a kind of pity. She was so needy, so demanding of attention. Look at her now, you think. Look how she's grown, how she doesn't need such things anymore. And all the while the bricks are laid. Every unseen note, every unasked question, every swallowed comment, every time you bite your tongue to keep the peace, every time you tell yourself it doesn't matter. They are bricks of polished patience. They are bricks of impeccable understanding. They are bricks of resigned love. You lay them with the skill of a master craftsman. You build a beautiful, strong, soundless wall. And you live inside it. You decorate the interior. You make it comfortable. You hang pictures of the family on the walls. You plant flowers in a little courtyard of your own making. You do not see that it is a cage. You call it a home. You call it your marriage. You become so good at this quiet life that you no longer notice the weight of the hush. The way it presses on your eardrums. The way it makes the world seem muffled and far away. Your own voice, when you do use it, sounds strange to you, a little too bright, a little forced, like you're speaking a language you're no longer fluent in. And then one day something happens. A small thing. Perhaps you drop a plate. It shatters on the kitchen floor. The sound is explosive. A shocking crack in the perfect silence. And as you stand there looking at the pieces, something in you shatters with it. Not into anger. Into a kind of terrifying clarity. In that sudden noisy aftermath you hear it. You hear the silence that has been there all along. Not a peaceful silence, a hollow one, a hungry one. It has been feeding on you for years. And in that moment you see the note. That very first note, the folded unread I love you. You see it not as a minor oversight but as a prophecy. A blueprint. For the first time you stop explaining it for him. You stop building the brick. You just look at it. You hold that old foolish feeling in your hands and you finally give it its true name. It was not a note he missed. It was a door he never opened. And you have been living in the hallway ever since. Waiting, being quiet, so very quiet, hoping he might one day turn the handle. But the handle is on your side of the door, my dear. It always has been, and the realization that comes is not that he is cruel. It is that you have been waiting for permission to inhabit your own life. Permission granted by a man who never even read the invitation. That is where it starts. Not with a fight, not with an affair, not with a cruel word. With a piece of paper. Unopened, a message sent but not received. The beginning of a long, long quiet. For decades I traded in the currency of thoughtfulness. It was the only language I believed held real value. It was my mother's language. The way she would set the table the night before a birthday breakfast. The way she would darn a sock not just to mend it but to weave a pattern, a little flower near the ankle where only the wearer would know it was there. I learned that love was a verb, a quiet, meticulous verb. It lived in the details. It was the work of seeing someone and then acting on that vision. So I became a student of him. A silent scholar of his needs, his history, his unspoken hurts. I built my life's work around the art of the thoughtful gesture. I remembered his mother's birthday when he forgot. I would buy the card weeks ahead, a nice one with cursive writing on the front. I would sign it from both of us. I would order the flowers to be delivered. Lilies because she liked them. When she called to thank him, his voice would be warm and he would say, "Oh, you're welcome, Mom." He would hang up and give me a look of genuine relief. A bullet dodged, and I would feel a small surge of usefulness. I had saved him from a moment of friction. I had smoothed a wrinkle in his world. That was my job, to be the wrinkle smoother, the memory keeper, the detail manager. I learned to make his father's favorite pie, a sour cherry pie with a lattice crust. His father was a stern man, a man of few words. But the first time I brought that pie to the table, his eyes softened. He ate 2 slices. He said, "This tastes just like my mother's." He never said thank you. Not in words, but he looked at me differently after that. He saw me as someone who understood a code. The code of heritage, of tradition, of speaking through food. My husband saw it too. He squeezed my hand under the table. That squeeze was my payment. It was enough. It had to be enough. I stayed up late to sew a button on his coat. The good wool coat he wore to important meetings. The thread had to match exactly. The stitches had to be small and even. I did it by lamplight long after he had gone to sleep. My eyes tired, my fingers pricked by the needle. I wasn't just sewing a button. I was sewing my care into the fabric. I was stitching my hope onto him. That he would walk into that room feeling pulled together, feeling supported, feeling loved from the inside out. That my tiny invisible stitches would somehow armor him with confidence. He never asked who fixed it. He probably never noticed the neat little stitches. He put the coat on and left. And I stood with my cup of coffee looking at the empty hallway, feeling like I had performed a small necessary magic. A magic that only existed if no one acknowledged it. I gave gifts that said, I see you. I know you. The watch was the pinnacle. He had spoken of it once years before. A passing comment about his grandfather, a proud man who lost everything in the Depression. The watch was pawned. It was the family's great small sorrow. I listened. I held that story. For 14 months I took typing jobs in the evenings. The children were asleep. The house was quiet except for the click 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 of the keys. My back ached. My vision blurred. I saved every dollar in a hidden envelope. I found the watch through a dealer. It was costly. It was more than we could afford. But it wasn't an expense. It was a repatriation. I was bringing a piece of his soul back to him. When he opened the box on our 20th anniversary, his face went pale. He recognized it immediately from the old photograph. He held it in his hands like a living thing. He cried. Real quiet tears. He said, this is the most meaningful gift I have ever received. He said, how did you know? How did you know this would mean everything? I just smiled. I didn't say, because I listened to the scraps of you that you let fall. Because I collect them. Because I study them like a map to your heart. My smile said it was nothing. My smile said, of course I knew. Because knowing him, that was my life's work. For his 50th birthday I learned to woodwork. Me, a woman in her 40s in a garage covered in sawdust. I burned myself on the sander. I hit my thumb with a hammer. The sailboat was his boyhood dream. He talked of it sometimes when he was wistful. A simple skiff he would sail on a lake. Freedom, solitude. I made it from plans I found in a library book. It took 6 months of stolen hours. When I gave it to him he was speechless. He put it on his office desk. He told everyone his wife was an artist. He was proud, not of the boat but of me as an extension of himself. Look what my wife made for me. See how well she loves me. The gift was no longer mine. It became a trophy of his own worthiness. With every gift I was whispering, this is how you love someone. Do you see? This is the language. This is the attention. This is the effort that says you are known. I was teaching by example. I was building a library of reference for how love should feel. A library only I visited. I waited for him to check out a book. To attempt to speak my language. Even badly. A misspelled word, a clumsy sentence. I would have taken it. I would have cherished the attempt. But the account was only in my name. He made no deposits. His gifts were transactions. A new vacuum cleaner because the old one was loud. A toaster. A practical coat. They were solutions to problems he perceived. They were not bridges to my soul. They were maintenance on the appliance of his life. Me, I was the central appliance. Kept clean and functioning. Upgraded occasionally for efficiency. Not cherished. Not studied. Not known. Our 40th anniversary arrived. A monumental number. 40 years. I suppose I expected something. Not a watch, not a sailboat, but a token, a single sentence in the language I had been speaking for a lifetime. I had trained him for 40 years after all. Surely he had learned a phrase. The little box was light. The paper was thin. I peeled it back, and there it was, that brittle bright thing, a mass-produced porcelain bird. Glaze too shiny, colors too garish, a trinket meant for a tourist. A thing you buy when you have thought of nothing and the register is right there and you need to fill your hand with something. He said I saw it at the gas station when I was getting air in the tires. Made me think of you. The sentence hung in the air between us. It was the final statement. The statement of a bankrupt enterprise. It said I was driving. I had a flat. I stood by the pump. I looked inside at the spinning rack of junk. And your face, your essence, your 40 years was so vague, so poorly defined in my mind that this generic bird, this placeholder for a thought seemed to suffice. It seemed to match you. It was not an insult. It was an audit. I held the bird. It was cold. It was light as a feather. It weighed nothing, and in that moment I felt the true weight of all my deposits. The watch, the sailboat, the pies, the mended coats, the unseen notes, the silent explanations, the swallowed words, they were all there in my hands, pressing down with the weight of a planet. I had been filling an account in a bank that did not exist. I had been speaking a love letter into a void. I had been curating a museum for a visitor who never came. The debt was not his to pay. It was mine to forgive. I had to forgive myself for believing the balance would ever change. For believing that if I just deposited enough kindness, enough memory, enough self-erasure, he would eventually look at the statement and feel moved to contribute. He would see the wealth of my attention and want to match it. But he never saw the statement. He never even knew there was a bank. That bird was my closing notice. The final entry, 0 balance, account closed. I placed it on the mantel. I did not rage. I did not weep. I felt a terrifying clarity. A clean cold clarity like glass. The work was over. The lifelong labor of loving him in a language he refused to learn was complete. I had graduated from the university of his neglect. My diploma was this cheap ridiculous bird. And it told me everything I needed to know. The curriculum was finished. There were no more lessons to give. No more exams to pass. It was time to take my knowledge and spend it on a subject I had neglected for 40 years. At first you think the pain is from the insult. The sheer cheapness of it. The laughable nature of a gas station trinket for a 40th wedding anniversary. Your mind clutches at the insult like a life raft. It is something you can understand. A measurable wound. You can hold it up and say, see how little he thinks of me. See this proof of my irrelevance. The insult has a shape, a color, a weight in your hand. It is something you can show to a friend or even to yourself in the mirror. You can fuel a righteous anger with it. You can build a day's worth of tears around its garish paint. It is a solid thing. But the deeper pain, the ache that settles into the marrow of your bones comes later. It comes in the quiet hours. It comes when the initial sting has faded and you are left alone with the object itself. It comes not from the insult but from the clarity. That is the true shock. The unveiling. That garish poorly painted bird was not just a gift. It was a perfect mirror. The most honest reflector I had ever been handed. It showed me the woman I had become in his eyes. Not the woman I was. Not the woman who loved gardenias and feared deep water and savored the first line of a novel. It showed me his perception, a sketch so faint, so lacking in detail it could accommodate any generic feminine shape. A wife-shaped outline. A placeholder. The bird was a placeholder for a thought. And I was a placeholder for a wife. He did not buy it out of malice. That is the most devastating part. If he had bought it to hurt me, that would have been a kind of recognition. A perverse intimacy. It would have meant he saw me clearly enough to know how to wound me. But he did not. He bought it because when the task of gift appeared on his mental list, my essence was so vague, so poorly defined that any symbol would do. A bird. A generic symbol of something. Freedom. Flight. He likely did not think that far. It was a thing with a hole in the bottom to slide onto a shelf. It was a thing that filled the hand when the hand was required to give. I held it and I saw myself reflected in its glossy blank eyes. I saw the woman who was convenient. Reliable. There. Always there. The woman who was part of the landscape of his life, like the well-positioned lamp or the reliable car. Noticed only when absent. Appreciated only for function. I saw the woman whose depths had never been plumbed because he had never been curious enough to lower a bucket. I saw the woman whose complexities had been sanded down over decades into a smooth, pleasant surface easy to ignore. The mirror showed me the years of being an afterthought. The birthday card signed at the last minute in the car. The Christmas present bought by his secretary. The flowers ordered online with a default message. It was not neglect born of hatred. It was neglect born of a profound absence of curiosity. I was a solved equation to him. A closed book. He had read the first page 40 years ago and assumed he knew the rest of the story. He never turned another page. He never wondered about the plot twists, the character development, the subtle changes in tone. He was content with the summary he had written in his mind long ago. In that mirror I saw the truth of our conversations. The way I would offer a story, a piece of my day, and he would nod and his eyes would shift to the television over my shoulder. He was not listening to the words. He was waiting for the sound of my voice to stop so the silence could return. My voice was not a river he wanted to swim in. It was a background noise he had learned to tune out, like the hum of the refrigerator. A steady, reliable hum that meant everything was working. Nothing required his attention. The mirror showed me my own complicity. My own artful shrinking. How I had learned to present a smaller self, a simpler version, so I would fit neatly into the box labeled wife. How I had edited my needs, my dreams, my opinions into bite-sized, manageable pieces that would not disturb his peace. I saw myself smiling and saying, "It's fine," when it was not fine. I saw myself pretending not to want so I would not be disappointed by not receiving. I saw myself becoming the ghost he already thought I was. I had furnished my own haunt with the quiet furniture of resignation. The bird was not the cause of my pain. It was the diagnosis. A doctor tapping my knee with a rubber hammer and finding no reflex. The problem was not the hammer. The problem was the silent, dead nerve. The nerve that had carried the messages of my heart for 40 years into a void. The nerve that had finally atrophied from lack of use. I placed the bird on the mantle. Not in a place of honor but in a place of witness. Right there among the artifacts of our life together. The photographs of smiling children. The seashell from a long ago vacation. The sailboat I had carved. It looked absurd there. A clown among mourners. That was its power. Its absurdity was its truth. It did not match. It did not belong. It was a stark, glaring note of dissonance in the careful symphony of our curated life. And that was the final clarity. The life was curated, by me. I had arranged the photographs, chosen the seashell, carved the boat. I had created the museum of our marriage. He was just a visitor passing through, occasionally glancing at the exhibits. The bird was the first exhibit he had ever contributed, and it revealed the entire museum as a beautiful, elaborate fiction. A stage set. I had been the playwright, the director, the set designer, and the only actor who knew all her lines. He was a man who had wandered onto the stage thinking it was a living room. The greatest heartbreak is not being hated. It is being unknown by the person who promised to know you. To stand before someone and realize you are a stranger to them. That the history you share is not a shared story but two parallel monologues. That the intimacy you built was a solitary construction. A treehouse you built alone, whispering to yourself that it was for both of you. He knew the facts of me. My birthday, my social security number, that I took my coffee black. He knew the outline, but he did not know the weather inside me. The climate of my soul. He did not know the fears that visited me in the blue hour before dawn. He did not know the secret hopes that had not died but had gone underground to survive. He did not know the music that made my heart ache, or the particular shade of autumn light that could make me weep with a joy so sharp it was almost pain. He did not know me, and the terrible truth the mirror revealed was that he had stopped trying to know me a very long time ago. Perhaps he never really started. The bird sat there. Every time I passed it, it said nothing. It simply was. It was the quietest, most screaming truth I had ever encountered. It asked no questions. It demanded no answers. It just reflected back the reality of a love that had been a monologue. A prayer sent to an empty sky. And in that reflection I did not see a villain. I saw a tired man who had married an idea and had never bothered to meet the woman. I saw a man who was content with the echo and had never listened for the voice. And I saw myself, a woman who had mistaken being needed for being known. Who had traded the profound loneliness of being unseen for the practical companionship of being useful. The mirror did not make me hate him. It made me grieve for us both. For the decades lost to a misunderstanding so basic, so fundamental. He thought love was about presence. About providing a space for me to exist. I thought love was about perception. About being seen in that space. We were speaking different languages from the very beginning. And I was the only one who had tried to learn his. I had become fluent in his silence. He had never learned a single word of my longing. The pain of the insult was sharp and clean. The pain of the clarity was a vast hollowing out. A slow seismic shift in the bedrock of my life. The insult said he does not value you. The clarity said you have built your life on a ghost. The insult made me want to fight. The clarity made me want to sit down very quietly and finally begin the long, slow work of meeting myself. The stranger I had been living with all along. The one he never saw. The one I had almost forgotten how to see. The bird was just a bird. A piece of painted plaster. But it became the still point, the fixed mark. The reference object from which I could finally take my bearings. It showed me north. And north was not toward him. North was the direction of my own neglected soul. A direction I had turned my back on for 40 years in the hope that facing him would be enough. The mirror showed me it was time to turn around. I didn't pack a bag that night. I didn't write a note. I didn't say a word. My leaving began internally, a quiet revolution in a country no one else could see. I emigrated. I emigrated from the land of us and I became a citizen of a new place, a place called myself. The border crossing was invisible. There was no guard, no stamp in a passport. It was a shift in the atmospheric pressure inside my own skin. A decision so fundamental it rearranged my molecules. I looked at the same four walls, the same sleeping man, and I understood they were no longer my home. My home was now the territory of my own attention. The first act of my new citizenship was silence. But not the old silence. The old silence was heavy, a held breath awaiting. This new silence was different. It was spacious. It was a listening. I stopped volunteering information about my day that I knew would be met with a vacant nod or a distracted hum. I would have the experience, the funny thing the cashier said, the sudden anxiety at the doctor's office, the pang of beauty at the sunset, and I would feel the old habit rise up the neural pathway worn smooth over 40 years, the path that led to him. The path that said take this piece of your life and offer it for his review. I would feel the impulse and then I would gently, consciously let it dissolve. I would keep the experience. It would stay with me. I would examine it myself. I would decide what it meant. I would be its sole witness. That piece of my life would not be sent out into the void to disappear. It would remain inside me, becoming part of my own soil. I took the money I saved from clipping coupons. For decades coupon clipping was an act of service, a tiny martial art of domestic economy practiced for the good of the household. The saved dollars were invisible, they were just part of the ether that kept the machine running. I took those dollars. They were mine, earned by my patience, my foresight, my time. I didn't take them from him. I reclaimed them from the blur of us. I bought a book, not a practical book, not a cookbook or a guide to anything. A book of poetry with a beautiful cover. The words inside made no sense to the part of me that managed grocery lists. They spoke to a part that had been dormant. I read one poem a day. I did not understand it all. That was the point. It was not for understanding. It was for resonance. A tuning fork struck somewhere in a dark room of my spirit. Then I bought a course. An online course about the history of botanical illustration. Why? I had no reason. I had never drawn a plant in my life. But I had always loved the precise beauty of those old drawings, the marriage of science and art. It was a whisper I had always ignored. A frivolous whisper. Now I listened. I used the household laptop in the evenings. He thought I was paying bills. I was sitting in a digital lecture hall learning about parchment and ink and the obsessive men and women who dedicated their lives to rendering a petal perfectly. It fed nothing and no one but a hungry, forgotten part of me. It was a secret, a glorious secret. My mind, which had been a tool for scheduling and remembering and anticipating, became a garden again. Things grew there that had no practical use. Their use was their beauty. Their use was my joy. I went for a walk and I did not report where I'd been. This was a profound act. For 40 years my movements had been a ledger. Grocery store, post office, pharmacy. My presence was accounted for. My absence had a reason. One morning I just walked. I turned left instead of right. I followed a street I had never taken. I saw a house with a willow tree I had never noticed. I sat on a public bench and I watched a squirrel work for 10 whole minutes. I came home. He was reading the paper. He said, "Where'd you go?" The old answer was a list. A justification. This time I simply smiled, a soft closed-mouth smile, and said, "Oh, just out." I offered no data. The silence that followed was not awkward for me. It was rich. It was mine. I had been somewhere he had not. I had a memory that belonged to me alone. I had broken the covenant of constant reporting. I had created a private life. I slowly, gently repatriated myself. I moved my capital of attention, my resources of care, back to the homeland of my own spirit. For decades my attention had been a currency spent entirely abroad. Investing in his mood, his career, his comfort, his family. My emotional resources were a foreign aid package with no end date. I called them back, not with resentment, with the quiet necessity of a nation realizing its own infrastructure is crumbling. When he was stressed about work I no longer launched a full-scale mental campaign to solve it, to absorb his anxiety, to talk him down. I would say, "That sounds difficult." And then I would let the difficulty be his. I would not make it my own. I would not let his storm become my weather. I built a psychic boundary, not of ice but of clear glass. I could see his storm but I stopped getting wet. When his mother called with her bottomless needs, her delicate criticisms, I no longer performed the emotional labor of translating, buffering, soothing. I handed him the phone. I said, "Your mother would like to speak with you." I removed myself from the triangle. I was no longer the switchboard operator for their dysfunctional circuit. The calls became shorter. He had less patience for it than I did. He had never developed the muscles for that labor because I had always done it. Let him build the muscles now or let the connection go static. It was not my concern. I stopped expanding my energy into the void of him. I stopped trying to fill the silence between us with my own frantic mental activity. I let the silence be. I let it be empty. I stopped cooking elaborate meals just to have something to offer, just to perform care. I made simple, nutritious food. If he wanted a feast he could dream one up himself. I stopped buying gifts for his family from us. If he forgot his niece's birthday, that was now a transaction between him and his sister. It was astonishing how much of my mental real estate had been leased to the management of his relationships. I evicted those tenants. The space felt cavernous and clean. He didn't notice the emigration papers I was signing in my heart. He was so accustomed to my old silence, the defeated, efficient quiet of the appliance, that he mistook this new, powerful, deliberate silence for the same thing. He saw me reading and thought I was passing time. He did not know I was in deep conversation with a poet from another century. He saw me at the computer and thought I was managing the mundane. He did not know I was tracing the vein of a leaf from 1742. He saw my calm and mistook it for contentment with him. He did not understand it was contentment with myself despite him. My body changed. The constant low-grade tension in my shoulders, the vigilance that kept my spine rigid, began to soften. I slept more deeply in the strange quiet of my own sovereignty. I looked in the mirror and I began to see not the wife, the mother, the hostess, but a face I was becoming reacquainted with. The eyes were less apologetic. They held a secret, a peaceful, unshareable secret. The house was the same. The routine was similar, but the entire inner architecture was different. I had moved the furniture of my soul. I had built a room inside myself with a door that locked from the inside. In that room I was not his wife. I was not anyone's mother. I was the woman who loved botanical illustrations and terrible poetry and the way the light hit the dust motes at 3 p.m. I was the woman who was slowly remembering her own name. The final stage of this internal immigration was the death of hope. Not the death of all hope. The death of hope in him. The hope that he would change. The hope that he would wake up one day and truly see me. That hope had been a kind of prison. A waiting room where I had sat for 40 years. I got up and left the waiting room. I stopped looking for clues of his awakening. I stopped interpreting his occasional pleasantness as a breakthrough. I took him at face value. A pleasant distant man sharing a house. Nothing more. The relief was immense. The energy I had spent on that hope, on that watching and waiting, was now a river flowing back into my own veins. I was no longer building a life with him. I was building a life alongside him. And there is a universe of difference in that preposition. With implies collaboration, shared materials, a single blueprint. Alongside simply acknowledges parallel construction. Two separate buildings on the same street. I was pouring my own foundation now. Quietly, steadily, and one day I knew the foundation would be strong enough to hold a whole new structure. A home for one, but until that day I lived in this new internal country. I learned its customs, I listened to its rhythms. I pledged my allegiance to its flag, which was the quiet steady beat of my own heart, finally heard above the noise of a life spent listening for his. The moment of his realization didn't come from a confrontation. I didn't plan it, I didn't rehearse a speech. There was no grand scene with slammed doors or laid out evidence. Those are the weapons of the engaged. I was no longer engaged. I had disengaged so completely that my very presence became a silent, unanswerable question. His realization came from the absence of the fight he had always expected. It came from the void where my pleading used to be. It came a year after the bird. A year of my quiet internal immigration. A year of me building my own soil under my own feet while standing in the same spot. It was a Thursday evening. Ordinary. The kind of evening that had made up the bulk of our 41 years. He was in his chair, the leather one that had molded to his shape. I was in mine across the room, the one with the good light for reading. I was reading a novel. A real novel, not a magazine. I was lost in it the way you can only be lost when your mind is not. Half listening for another's needs. I was not waiting for him to speak. I was not hoping he would ask about my book. I was simply in my own world, a world of words and imagined landscapes. My piece was a tangible thing, a sphere around my chair. He was staring at the mantel. I felt his gaze more than saw it. It was a heavy thing, a slow searching thing. His eyes moved from object to object. They traveled the museum I had built. They landed on the gold pocket watch in its velvet case. It sat there gleaming dully in the lamplight, a relic of a moment when he felt seen. His eyes lingered there. I could almost hear the memory playing in his head. His tears. His wonder. How did you know? His gaze shifted to the little wooden sailboat. The one I carved with blistered hands. It sat on a shelf slightly tilted as if catching a wind. He had told colleagues his wife was an artist. He had been proud then. Proud of the reflection it cast on him. A man worthy of such devotion. He looked at it now not as a trophy but as a thing. A thing made. A thing that represented hours and hours of my solitary focus, my study of his boyhood dream. His eyes moved to the photographs. The children at various stages. Me and them too, always the organizer, the glue, the smiling anchor. He looked at the seashell from Maine. Our first vacation. I had kept it. He probably didn't remember the day we found it. I did. I remembered the cool spray, the way he held my hand, not out of tenderness but to steady me on the rocks. And then finally, inevitably, his eyes found it. The bird. That cheap garish thing. It sat among these other objects like a crude joke, a typo in a love letter. It was the one thing he had contributed to the collection. The one artifact of his own perception. He looked at it for a long time. I kept reading, but I was aware now. I was aware of the silent collision happening in the room. The collision between the story he had told himself and the evidence before him. The evidence of my meticulous care lined up against the single piece of evidence of his profound thoughtlessness. They sat side by side in the impartial light of the lamp. A lifetime of my language versus the one word he had spoken in his. And the word was nothing. The word was a blank. I felt his stillness deepen. It was the stillness of a man stepping into a hole he didn't know was there. The air in the room changed. It became charged with a dawning horror. Not the horror of being caught but the horror of being shown. Of being shown to himself. He said my name, Marianne, just that, a breath really, a puff of air filled with the weight of a collapsing narrative. I looked up from my book. Slowly, calmly, I didn't snap to attention. I wasn't startled from my piece. I simply transferred my gaze from the world in my hands to the man across the room. My eyes met his. There was no anger in my look. No accusation, no pleading, no expectation. My gaze was clean. It was open. It was simply present. It was the gaze of someone seeing him exactly as he was in that moment, without history, without future. Just a man looking at a cheap bird on a mantel. In that silence held with absolute dignity, the entire architecture of our marriage crumbled between us. It didn't crumble with noise. It crumbled with the soft sound of dust settling. All the unsaid words, all the unseen notes, all the unfulfilled promises, they didn't rush in to fill the space. They just evaporated. They were no longer needed. The truth was sitting right there on the mantel. It didn't need my voice to explain it. He said, "The bird," his voice was thin. It's awful, isn't it?" He didn't ask if I liked it. He didn't make an excuse. He stated a fact that had taken him a full year to see. A fact that had been obvious to me the moment I unwrapped it. He was finally reading the message. I didn't nod. I didn't smile a bitter smile of vindication. I didn't say "I told you so" or "What did you expect?" I simply held his gaze. I let his words hang in the air between us. I let him hear them. I let him feel the awful weight of that word. Awful. I let him sit in the realization that he had given his wife of 40 years an awful gift. And that the awfulness was not in the object but in the profound lack of thought it represented. The profound lack of her in his mind. My calm was a mirror. It reflected back to him not my pain but his own action stripped of all the cushioning stories he told himself. The story that he was busy. The story that he was a provider not a romantic. The story that I didn't need such things. All those stories were gone. All that was left was the bird and my calm acceptance of it. My acceptance was the most terrible judgment of all. Because it wasn't an angry rejection. It was a serene acknowledgement of a truth so fundamental it required no emotional response. I had accepted the bird because I had finally accepted him. I had accepted that this was his capacity. This was the level of his sight. And in accepting that I had freed myself from the hope for more. In the terrible clarifying silence I held a silence not of anger but of simple unassailable fact. He had to sit with the question I would never ask aloud. The question my entire being now posed, what does this say about you? That was the power. I never voiced it. I never weaponized it. I simply was it. I was the living embodiment of that question. Every quiet meal, every peaceful reading session, every time I smiled that soft closed smile I was asking it. And now in the face of the evidence he had to answer it for himself. His quiet horrified, "Oh," that escaped his lips was worth more than any screamed argument, any tearful breakdown, any ultimatum I had ever considered in my weakest moments. That, "Oh," was the sound of a man's interior world cracking open. It was the sound of him finally for the first time in 41 years seeing the landscape from my perspective. And the view was devastating. He didn't see a nagging wife. He didn't see an ungrateful woman. He saw a patient calm presence and a grotesque token of his own neglect. The contrast was so stark, so morally obvious, it left no room for his usual defensiveness. What could he say? I wasn't attacking. I was just sitting there. Loving him. No, not anymore. But judging him. Not even that. I was just there. A fact. As much a fact as the bird. My calm forced him to confront what my tears never could. My tears in the past had been about my hurt. They allowed him to play the comforting role or the frustrated role. They kept the dynamic going. They were part of the dance. My calm was not part of the dance. It was the cessation of music. It was the still floor. He had nothing to respond to but the echo of his own actions. Letting someone sit in the silent, uncomfortable space of their own behavior is the most powerful reckoning you can offer. You were not the prosecutor. You were not the judge. You were the court reporter. You simply record the facts with your presence. You allow the truth to be the only witness. And in that sterile quiet room with no drama to deflect onto, the soul is forced to look at itself. It has nowhere else to look. He put his head in his hands. He didn't cry. He just sat like that for a long time. I went back to my book. Not to be cruel, but because my work there was done. The revelation was his business now. My peace was no longer an absence of conflict. It was a positive force, a solid thing. It was the foundation I had built while he wasn't looking. And now he was looking at the beautiful finished house of my peace and seeing the shoddy souvenir he had offered in exchange for my life. He finally whispered, "I'm sorry." And I knew he was. In that moment he truly was. But the apology was for the bird. It could never be for the 40 years of unseen notes. It could never be for the loneliness that had been my companion. It could never be for the woman he never knew. The apology was for the symptom. The disease had run its course. I had already convalesced in a separate room. I accepted his apology with a slight nod. No words. "No, it's okay." Because it wasn't okay. The nod simply meant I heard you. I hear your sorrow. But my sorrow was my own and it was already a healed scar. His sorrow was a fresh wound and he would have to tend to it himself. The moment passed. The silence returned, but it was a different silence. It was a silence he now owned. It was no longer my burden to fill. It was his to contemplate. I had given him the final gentle gift of my truth, not by speaking it but by being it. And in that truth he was finally and forever alone with what he had made. When I finally left, it was an administrative task. A series of practical motions. The true leaving was already done. The emigration was complete. My soul had already crossed the border and filed its paperwork. What remained was the physical logistics of moving a body and a few boxes from one point on a map to another. It felt like cleaning a house after the guests have long gone home. The life of the party was over. This was just the gathering of empty cups, the straightening of chairs. I took only what belonged to me. This was a crucial distinction. Not what belonged to us. Not what I had purchased for the household. Not the furniture we picked out together, not the shared china, not the art chosen to match the sofa. Those things were artifacts of the collective, of the entity called us, that had dissolved. I left them as one leaves stage props after the final curtain. They were part of the set dressing for a play that had ended. To take them would have been to confuse the prop with the actor. I was the actor and I was walking off the stage. I took my books. Their cracked spines and margin notes were the topography of my inner life. I took my grandmother's quilt, each stitch a whispered prayer from a woman I never knew but whose hands had made this warmth. I took my own set of china from before I was married, a simple pattern of violets on a white field, a relic of the girl who had tastes of her own. I took the photographs where I existed as myself, not just as the photographer. I took the bird. Of course I took the bird. It was my compass. It was my diploma. The process was quiet, methodical. I did not pack in a frenzy. I did it over weeks. A box here, a bag there. He noticed but he did not see. He saw objects leaving shelves but he did not comprehend the migration of a spirit. He would come into a room and see a blank space where a painting had been, and he would look puzzled as if trying to solve a minor domestic mystery. Where did that go? He never asked. The silence between us had become a vast continent and we were on separate shores. The day arrived. It was a Tuesday, a neutral day. There was no storm, no dramatic soundtrack. The sun was out. A moving truck too small for a life but perfectly sized for a person stood in the driveway. Two polite young men carried my boxes. They were careful. They treated my things with a gentle respect he had never managed. They asked, "Is this it, ma'am?" And I said yes. This is it. This is everything. He stood in the living room surrounded by the life I had curated. The life that now felt like a museum after hours, empty and echoing. The furniture looked suddenly too large, too formal, without the spirit that had animated it. The shelves looked sparse where my books had been. The mantel looked absurdly lopsided. The watch, the sailboat, the photos, the shell, they were all still there. But the bird was gone. Its absence was a louder statement than its presence had ever been. The one thing he gave was the one thing I took. He looked small. He looked lost. He was a man standing in a fully furnished void. He was surrounded by all the things, but the thing that made them a home was walking out the door. He was realizing in his gut what his mind had been too slow to grasp. A home is not made of objects. It is made of attention. And my attention had withdrawn, leaving every object suddenly stark and meaningless. I had one last box in my hands. It held my toothbrush, my hairbrush, the small mundane tools of a body. I walked towards the front door. He moved as if to block my path, not with aggression but with the bewildered instinct of a child watching a parent leave. He said, "What did I do?" Not "What are you doing?" Not "Where are you going?" Not "Please don't leave." What did I do? It was the question of a man auditing a ledger he never knew he was supposed to keep. He was searching for the single entry, the one big mistake, the catastrophic error that could explain this. He could not fathom that it wasn't one entry. It was the absence of entries. It was the blank pages. I stopped. I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, the genuine confusion. And I felt no fury. I felt a distant, almost clinical pity. This was the moment for the speech, the listing of wounds, the grand articulation of a lifetime of neglect. I had dreamed of this moment in my angrier years. I had composed soliloquies in the dark. But when it arrived, the words were gone. They were no longer in me. They had been translated into action, into my packed boxes, into my calm face. To speak them now would be to translate them back into a language he still wouldn't understand. It would be to re-engage in the old exhausting work of explaining myself. I was done explaining, so I gave him the final gentle gift of my truth, the distilled essence of it. I looked into his confused, frightened eyes and I said it plainly, softly, without a trace of malice. "You didn't do anything, Charles. You just didn't." And I saw the words hit him. You just didn't. They were so simple, so devastating. They bypassed the catalogue of crimes and went straight to the sin of omission. The sin of absence. The sin of not seeing, not hearing, not knowing, not trying. He had not been a villain. He had been a ghost. A pleasant, smiling ghost who shared a house. And you cannot fight a ghost. You can only stop believing in it. My words hung in the air. They were not an accusation. They were a diagnosis, a clinical statement of fact. You didn't do anything. You just didn't. And I closed the door. Not with a slam. A slam would have been engagement. A slam would have been heat and anger and a punctuation mark he could understand. A slam would have given him the drama of a villain, a reason to get angry, in return a wave of emotion to ride over the hard truth. I closed it with a soft, definitive click. The click of a lock settling into place. The click of a latch finding its home. The click of a period at the end of a very long sentence. It was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a boundary becoming physical. It was the sound of separation made real. That click was the sound of my freedom. It was not a freedom born of hatred or vengeance. It was a freedom born of completion. I had finished the work. The work of loving him. The work of hoping for him. The work of building a life around his absence. The work was done. The contract was fulfilled. The click was the sound of the final page turning. I stood on the porch for a moment. The sun was warm on my face. I could hear the birds in the old oak tree. I could hear the distant hum of the moving truck's engine. I did not look back at the house. I looked at the sky. It was wide and blue and it belonged to no one. I took a breath, a deep full breath that filled lungs that no longer felt constricted by the atmosphere of that house. The air tasted different. It tasted of possibility. It tasted of silence I owned. I walked to the truck. I did not feel like a woman fleeing. I felt like a woman arriving. The administrative task was complete. The body had followed the spirit. They were reunited now in the same geographical location. Me. As the truck pulled away, I did not cry. I felt a profound quiet. A quiet that was no longer empty but full of my own presence. For 40 years I had shared a space and been lonely. Now I was alone and I was not lonely. I was accompanied by myself. A fascinating, capable stranger I was getting to know. The click of that door was not an end. It was an opening. It was the sound of one world shrinking behind me and another vast tender world swinging open before me. A world where the notes I wrote would be read by my own eyes. A world where the gifts I gave would be to my own soul. A world where I would never again have to explain my own heart to a stone. It was the sound of my hands finally free. So that is the story of the bird. The story of a quiet end and a quieter beginning. It is not a story of winning or losing. In the end, there was no contest. Only a woman who finally chose herself. People ask if I am angry. They ask if I hate him. Anger and hate require a fire, and my fire burned down to ash a long time ago. What remains is cool and clean. I feel for him a distant sorrow, the way you might feel for a character in a book who never learned the lesson the story was trying to teach. He is a figure in my past now, receding gently, like a shoreline. Do I regret the 40 years? I cannot regret my children. I cannot regret the woman they forced me to become, strong, resilient, a master of silent endurance. I regret only that I believed for so long that endurance was the same as living. I confused survival for life. And life, my dears, is meant to be lived, not just survived. I live now in a small apartment with good light. The bird sits on my windowsill. I do not look at it with bitterness. I look at it with gratitude. It was the key that fit the lock. It opened the door to the rest of my life. Sometimes, in the evening, I sit with a cup of tea and I listen to the silence. It is not his silence. It is my silence, and in it, I can finally hear my own thoughts. They are kind thoughts. They are thoughts about what I might plant on the little balcony in the spring. They are thoughts about a line in a poem I still don't fully understand, but whose beauty stings my heart. They are thoughts that belong only to me. He has tried to call. Once or twice. The sound of his voice on the answering machine is strange to me now, like listening to a radio broadcast from a country where I no longer reside. I do not call back. There are no more words to say. You just didn't, was the full and final translation of my heart. There is no sequel to that sentence. This is what I want you to hear, more than anything else in my story. Your peace is not something another person gives you. It is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of yourself. It is the sound of your own soul, finally audible above the din of someone else's inattention. You can build it in the quietest ways. In the book you buy for no reason. In the walk you take without a destination. In the thought you keep for yourself, just because it is yours. Brick by quiet brick, you can build a room of your own inside yourself, and then you can one day step inside and close the door. And when you close that door, let it be with a click, not a slam. A click is a whole and complete sound. It means the mechanism works. It means you are secure. It means you are, at last, home. Good night, my dears, and may your own silence be full of everything you need to hear.